All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into justice and dictatorship.
Ooh.
Two concepts that, at first glance might seem like they're total opposites.
Yeah.
But trust me, they're way more connected than you might think.
For sure.
We've got a really interesting mix of sources lined up for this one.
Yeah, we do.
We've got philosophers, religious texts, even some political strategists in the mix.
I know, it's a really fascinating kind of combination, right?
Talk about a mixed bag.
Yeah, it is. It's really cool, though, how all of these different areas kind of converge on these fundamental questions about power, fairness,
Right.
and like what it means to live in a just society.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're here to unpack.
Yeah.
So let's start with the big question.
Okay.
What is justice anyway? I mean,
Yeah.
we throw that word around all the time,
Right.
But actually trying to nail down a concrete definition, sometimes it feels like you're trying to catch smoke.
It really is.
Yeah.
It is slippery, that concept of justice.
Yeah.
But to get us started, maybe we should look back
Okay.
to one of the OG thinkers, Aristotle.
Okay.
He had this very classic definition of justice. He said, justice is giving each person what they are due.
Okay.
Seems simple enough, right?
Yeah, on the surface, I guess. But then you start to think about it, and it's
Well,
like,
that's
wait,
right.
what do people actually deserve?
Exactly.
And then who gets to decide that?
Right.
It gets really complicated really quickly.
It does. And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
So let's fast forward a little bit
Okay.
to the 20th century,
Right.
to a philosopher named John Rawls.
Okay.
And he had this idea of justice as fairness.
Okay.
And his focus was really on trying to create a society where everyone has an equal shot, no matter what their background is or their circumstances.
Okay, so how do you actually build a society like that?
Right.
I mean, the world is full of inequalities.
Well, Rawls has this really brilliant thought experiment. It's called the veil of ignorance.
The veil of ignorance.
Yeah.
Okay.
So imagine you're designing a society totally from scratch,
Okay.
but you have no idea where you're going to end up in that society.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
You don't know if you're going to be rich or poor, healthy or sick,
Gotcha.
powerful or powerless.
Okay.
How would you structure things to make sure everyone gets a fair shake?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It really makes you think about the kinds of systems and policies we need to create a truly just society.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it this way. If you were designing healthcare, but you didn't know if you were going to be born healthy or with some kind of chronic illness, wouldn't you want to create a system that makes sure everyone gets the care they need?
Exactly. I mean, the veil of ignorance really forces us to step outside of our own biases and really think about what's truly fair for everybody.
That's amazing.
And it's a really powerful tool for analyzing all kinds of social or political issues.
It makes you wonder how many conflicts and injustices could be avoided if everyone thought about things that way.
Absolutely.
So we've got Aristotle's idea of giving everyone their due and Rawls with his focus on fairness.
Yeah.
What other kind of perspectives on justice are out there?
Well, let's bring in another perspective.
Okay.
Let's look to the wisdom of the Quran.
Okay.
And the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Okay.
The Islamic perspective really emphasizes justice as both a personal and a societal obligation. So it's not just about how individuals treat each other, but how society functions as a whole.
Gotcha. So it's like this interconnected web of responsibilities.
Exactly.
Can you give me an example of how that plays out?
Sure, yeah. So, for example, the Quran in 16.9 states that God commands justice, doing good, and generosity towards relatives.
Okay.
And he forbids all shameful deeds, injustice, and rebellion. So it's a very comprehensive approach.
Right.
That covers everything from, how we interact with each other.
Yeah.
To social and political systems.
Right. So it's about creating a society where fairness is woven into the fabric of how we live.
Exactly.
And, speaking of taking action, there's that really powerful saying from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that says, whoever of you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand.
Yes.
If he cannot, then with his tongue. And if he cannot, then with his heart. And that is the weakest of faith.
That's such a crucial point because justice isn't passive.
Right.
It requires action from us.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility to speak up against injustice, to challenge systems that perpetuate inequality,
Yeah.
to work towards a more just world.
It's a call to action.
It is.
It's a reminder that you can't just sit back and hope that things will get better.
Right.
You have to be actively involved.
Yeah.
But how does this relate to dictatorships?
Right.
I mean, those regimes seem to thrive on injustice. They thrive on silencing people.
Yeah.
And consolidating power.
That's where we start to see that complex interplay.
Okay.
Between justice and dictatorship.
Okay.
So dictatorships rarely just appear out of thin air.
Right.
They often arise in societies that are really struggling.
Okay.
Maybe facing economic hardship, political instability, even violence and chaos.
So it's just like people are so desperate for stability that they're willing to give up some of their freedoms for the promise of order.
Exactly.
In these kind of chaotic situations. A leader who comes in and says, I can fix everything, can seem very appealing.
Absolutely.
Even if it means, giving up some of your individual rights.
Yeah, and this reminds me of Thomas Hobbes.
Okay.
And his book Leviathan.
Okay.
He argued that sometimes people actually choose a dictator.
Wow.
Out of fear of something even worse.
Oh, wow.
Like total anarchy and constant conflict.
That's a scary thought.
It is.
But I can see how it happens.
Yeah.
If you're living in a society where things feel like they're falling apart, like the economy's in shambles, there's violence everywhere, the government can't do anything to stop it.
Right.
And suddenly this leader emerges who says, I can restore order.
Yes.
I can crush the opposition. I can make things safe again.
It's tempting.
It's very tempting.
Yeah. To embrace that promise, even if it comes at a cost.
It's that classic trade-off, right?
Yes.
Security in exchange for freedom.
Exactly. And dictators are masters at exploiting that fear and uncertainty. They paint themselves as the only ones who can save the nation.
Right. Only I can fix it.
Yeah.
But history shows us that this kind of power grab rarely ends well.
Right.
Giving one person that much power is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. And even if their intentions are good in the beginning,
right,
without accountability, without checks and balances, it's so easy to slip into tyranny.
Yeah. And this reminds me of Machiavelli.
Oh, yeah?
And his book, The Prince.
Okay.
Where he was arguing that a ruler can sometimes be justified in using harsh methods if it's for the good of the state.
It's for the greater good, right.
But that seems like such a slippery slope.
It is a slippery slope. And Machiavelli himself acknowledged that.
Okay.
Like he was basically saying, the ends don't always justify the means.
Yeah.
And even a leader who starts out with good intentions can become corrupted by absolute power.
It's a risk you take when you hand over all control to one person.
It is.
So we've got this perfect storm brewing.
Right.
You've got a society craving stability.
Yeah.
A leader promising all the solutions.
Yeah.
Even some philosophical justification for these strongman tactics.
Exactly.
But why do people actually give up their rights?
Right.
Is it always just fear, or is there something more going on?
I mean, fear is definitely a major factor.
Yeah.
But it's not always just this simple fear of violence or chaos.
Right.
Sometimes it's fear of the other.
Okay.
Right? Fear of a different ethnic group or religion or political ideology.
Okay.
And dictators are really good at exploiting those fears.
Yeah.
And turning people against each other.
Yeah.
Creating these scapegoats.
Right.
Promising to protect the in-group from these dangerous outsiders.
Yeah.
It's a very old tactic.
Yeah. It's like they're offering this twisted kind of belonging.
Right.
Like, you're safe as long as you're on their side.
Yes.
But everyone else is the enemy.
Exactly.
It's chilling. But what happens when people start to see through it?
Right.
How do societies fight back against dictatorship and reclaim their freedom?
That's what we're going to explore.
Okay.
In the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Things are going to get really inspiring.
I can't wait.
Welcome back to our deep dive into justice and dictatorship. In the last part, we were talking about how dictators exploit fear and division to seize power. But history shows us that even the most oppressive regimes can be challenged and eventually, dismantled.
That's what's so fascinating to me about this whole topic. It would be easy to get discouraged, right? To feel like we're up against these insurmountable forces. But then you look at history and you see all these incredible examples of people rising up, demanding justice, and ultimately winning back their freedom. It's truly inspiring.
It is. And, while there's no magic formula for toppling a dictator, there are some common threads that we see again and again in successful resistance movements.
Like what? Give us the inside scoop.
Well, one of the most crucial elements is education. As we've been talking about, knowledge is power.
Right.
When people understand their rights, when they can recognize propaganda for what it is, and they see through the dictator's attempts to divide them, they become much harder to control.
So it's not just about formal education then, it's also about spreading awareness and like critical thinking skills. Are there any historical examples that illustrate this?
Absolutely. Think about the fall of the Soviet Union. One of the key factors there was this spread of information and ideas that challenged the official narrative.
Huh.
People started to see the cracks in the system, and they started demanding more freedom and accountability. The circulation of banned books and underground publications played a huge role in that. It's amazing how these seemingly small acts of defiance can actually chip away at a regime's control.
It shows you the power of ideas and how dictators are ultimately afraid of an informed and engaged populace.
Exactly. And in today's digital age, technology has become an even more potent tool for spreading information and connecting people. Think about the role of social media during the Arab Spring uprisings, or how activists in countries like Iran and China use the internet to bypass censorship and share their stories with the world.
It's like that game of whack-a-mole. Dictators can try to control the flow of information, but the truth always finds a way to seep out.
It really does.
Yeah.
And the more people are exposed to different perspectives, the harder it becomes for dictators to maintain their grip on power.
That's encouraging. But information alone isn't enough, is it? People need to be organized and united to effectively challenge a dictatorship. How do these resistance movements actually gain traction and momentum?
That's where we see the power of collective action. It starts with small acts of defiance, speaking out against injustice, sharing forbidden information, organizing these like underground meetings. And as more people join the movement, they gain strength and momentum.
It's like a snowball rolling downhill, gathering more and more snow as it goes.
Exactly. Eventually becomes unstoppable.
But this is where things can get really dangerous, right? Wouldn't a dictator just like crush these movements before they get too big? I mean, they control the military, the police, the courts.
It's a valid concern. And dictators certainly try to quell dissent through force and intimidation.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Power isn't just about brute force. It's also about legitimacy and the consent of the governed. And when enough people withdraw their consent, the dictator's power starts to crumble.
It's like that saying, you can't make someone a slave if they don't believe they are one. It's about shifting the mindset from obedience to resistance.
Precisely. And this is where nonviolent resistance can be so powerful. Think about figures like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. They showed the world that it's possible to confront injustice without resorting to violence. And often, that moral high ground can win over hearts and minds in a way that brute force never could.
Makes sense. But it must be incredibly difficult to maintain that nonviolent discipline in the face of such oppression and brutality.
It takes immense courage and commitment. And it's not always successful. But when it works, it can be truly transformative. Nonviolent movements can really expose the dictator's brutality for what it is, undermine their legitimacy, and inspire others to join the cause.
And I imagine having international support can make a big difference, too.
Right.
When other countries condemn the regime and put pressure on them to reform, it can weaken their grip on power.
Absolutely. Dictators often rely on international legitimacy to maintain their power. And when that legitimacy is eroded, it can have a domino effect.
So we've got education and awareness raising, collective action, nonviolent resistance, international pressure. It's a multi-pronged approach.
It is, and it highlights the fact that toppling a dictatorship isn't just about fighting against something. It's about building something better in its place.
Which brings us back to our earlier discussion about justice. Because ultimately, the goal of any resistance movement should be to create a more just and equitable society.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, because it forces us to grapple with the question of what a just society actually looks like.
That's a big question, one that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries, and there's no easy answer.
There isn't. But I think it's a question worth exploring, because it gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. The relationship between justice and dictatorship, and the ongoing struggle to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
So let's dive into that in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore what a just society might look like and how we can all contribute to making that vision a reality. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into justice and dictatorship. We've covered so much ground already. We've talked about how dictatorships rise, how people resist them, and all the different ways we think about justice itself. But now I want to get practical.
Okay.
What does a just society actually look like in real life?
Yeah.
I mean, is it even possible to achieve?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like a society where everyone is treated fairly, where rights are respected, opportunities are available to all, no matter your background, your beliefs, your circumstances. It's a lofty goal. And there's no like one-size-fits-all blueprint, Each society has its own unique challenges and context.
Right.
But I do believe it's a vision worth striving for.
I agree. But it feels like we're so far from that ideal in so many parts of the world,
Yeah.
Inequality, corruption, prejudice. And these problems feel so deeply entrenched.
Yeah.
How do we even begin to tackle them?
Well, I think it starts by recognizing that justice isn't a destination.
Oh, okay.
It's a journey. It's this constant process of striving for a more equitable and humane world.
Mm-hmm.
And it requires action on multiple fronts.
Okay.
From the individual level to the societal level.
Right.
And even on the global stage.
So what are some concrete steps we can take as individuals to actually move in the right direction? I'm thinking about things our listeners can actually do in their own lives, not just these abstract ideas.
Yeah. So one of the most powerful things you can do is to educate yourself about the issues that you care about.
Mm-hmm.
Read books.
Huh?
Listen to podcasts like this one.
Okay.
Engage in thoughtful conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And be willing to challenge your own assumptions. Okay. The more informed you are, the better equipped you'll be to actually make a difference.
Knowledge is power, as they say. But it's not enough to just absorb information, right?
Yeah.
We have to take that knowledge and turn it into action.
Absolutely. Get involved in your community.
Okay.
Support organizations that are fighting for social justice.
Mm-hmm.
Volunteer your time.
Yeah.
Donate to causes you believe in.
Yeah.
Even small acts of kindness and compassion can create a ripple effect.
And don't underestimate the power of your voice.
Wow.
Speak up when you see injustice, challenge prejudice. Hold those in power accountable. Whether it's through writing to your elected officials, attending protests, or simply having difficult conversations with friends and family, your voice matters.
It really does. It's about using whatever platform you have, however big or small, to amplify the voices of those who are marginalized.
Yeah.
And to advocate for positive change.
But let's be honest, it's easy to get discouraged, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like the problems are just too big, too overwhelming. How do we stay motivated and hopeful in the face of so much injustice?
Well, I think it's important to remember that you're not alone in this.
Okay.
There are countless others who share your values and are working towards a better future. Find those people, build community with them, support each other, and celebrate the victories no matter how small.
It's about finding your tribe, your people, the ones who inspire you and give you the strength to keep fighting the good fight.
Exactly. And remember, progress isn't always linear.
Yeah.
There will be setbacks. There will be moments of despair. But the important thing is to keep moving forward.
Okay.
To never give up hope.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into justice and dictatorship, I'm left with this sense of hope, but also this renewed sense of responsibility. It's clear that creating a just society requires this collective effort, We all have a role to play.
We do. And it's a role worth embracing because ultimately the pursuit of justice is what makes us human. It's what connects us to something greater than ourselves.
Yes. And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. What will your contribution be to the ongoing pursuit of justice? How will you use your knowledge, your voice, your actions to create a world where everyone can thrive? It's a question worth pondering, and one that we hope this deep dive has inspired you to answer. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
And remember, the fight for justice continues.